but finally, we're actually learning a little bit more about news that was kind of in the open in December, right? In January, the end of January, but then it kind of got brushed
News
under the
was
rug, right?
Yeah, the news was there, but people didn't pay attention to it, and it wasn't pushed by the media, right? So there's a news report that would come out, like in Boston. You had Boston local news reporting that a Harvard professor of the School of Virology, right, the biology school, was arrested for actually selling, um, I guess, research papers and a bunch of other stuff to Chinese agents that were students here, but actually was Chinese military. That came out in October of last year. Now, how many times have you heard about it aside from us talking about it? Have you seen it circulating through the media? There should be something right with this conversation that we're having nationally or even internationally. We're talking about Wuhan Lab and China and all of this stuff, right? But then you have that part right there. You have a Harvard head of biology department actually colluding with military personnel from China, bringing biological material on planes in their sock to Wuhan. Why isn't why aren't they talking about it? They might now because they're trying to push now the idea that China is doing this. So, you could say it's a false flag type of idea, or you could say it's the truth. We don't really know what's going on there, but the narrative is changing with the times because as humans, we always have to blame something on someone, right? Right 9/11, there needed to be someone has to pay for this. We have to have somebody pay for this. Right now, we're talking about China needs to pay for this. So now we have investigations, quote unquote, going on. What do you think?
No, no, I think that's exactly it. As when the curtain is removed, and then we learn. No, it's we've been talking about this for a while, and the people that have been subscribing and following us have been informed on this the whole time. But we actually brought up, I think, about the idea that the U.S. media had kind of plugged in the whole war terminology into this early on, and when we were looking at Operation Mockingbird, and also when we were reviewing, well, what was the other one again, Mike?
So
Operation
yeah, we have Northwoods, Operation Mockingbird, MK Ultra.
MK Ultra, right? And we know that the media is used to prepare kind of society or control the way that society thinks. So, kind of embedding that war thought in the head of Americans for the last 2 months was a pretty good thing to do now before turning the blame now back onto China. But so this doctor then, Mike, I mean, this is because I did see the story as well, but this is an individual who was selling information to China, correct? We've talked about how even Wuhan is the biodefense, I believe one of the biodefense capitals of China, but there's a lot of international research that's done there as well. So it's more like a multinational type of city when it comes to this kind of work, right? So Americans would be working there type of deal.
Yeah,
In
well, yeah, Americans are working there. It's not just Americans per se. It's more also American companies, pharmaceutical industries, institutes. You have American or international institutes that work together as a community. When you look at the WHO, right? We look at the WHO as an institution where you have not just countries, government bodies. You also have corporations representing certain nations or certain ideals. You have individuals like Bill Gates, supposedly the second highest investor within that realm of the WHO. First, I think being the United States, third being China. I'm sure now that Trump's saying that he's going to pull funds away, that'll shift. Probably not. I'm sure Trump will do that, but Gates and people that are associated with will probably use the lobbying power to shift that policy towards, because we got to go back to it, right? We have lobbyists. America is full of lobbyists, but America isn't the only one. You have the
Mhm.
same idea in any organization that's democratically ran, you have that concept of lobbyist. China itself doesn't have a lobbying system within the government per se, but when it's outside, they do actually employ lobbyists. We have lobbyists that work for China within the U.S. government, within the EU, within the United Nations, the WHO, and so there's a lot going there. So now you go back to Wuhan. There, they say that Wuhan has a military type of system in there, unconfirmed, but they have a level 4 lab that is actually ran in conjunction with these institutes. And that's the problem here. It's hard, we say China is an easy scapegoat. Oh, Wuhan, it's a Chinese lab. Well, let me tell you something. If you look at a university is not just an American university. You have many entities within universities. Even look, let's use China as an example.
Mm-hmm.
You and I went to CCSU, Central Connecticut State University, out in New Britain, Connecticut. And you have a Confucius Institute, which is actually an arm of the Chinese government that is there to, as they say, spread awareness of what China is and, who they are and try to bring certain services and social services. But then you have the U.S. government and other entities like intelligence services saying that that's a propaganda arm. Now, let's circle back to UT, right? We have the University of Texas being investigated by the feds because of their dealings with Wuhan. And why is that? Because in Wuhan, they have all of these institutes working in there in conjunction. Now, there's two sides of the coin. The Chinese government could be using this as a front that they're collaborating with institutions to, further understand viruses, diseases, and the like. And then you have the other side of the coin that it's actually an institution doing that. It could be both, right? One feeds the other. This happened in Chernobyl, right? Chernobyl was a nuclear power plant used to power parts of Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia. But at the same time, we have evidence that they also were trying to, use experimentation with, uranium and all of that for military purposes and the like too, right? That has been proven after the fall of the Soviet Union. So you have two sides of the coin there. You could do the same thing with labs. We do that here as well.
Yeah, and one of the more interesting parts for me right now is, where we stand from a world power perspective, right? So we've talked about this a lot. We are now entering this transitionary period where, the United States has been a world superpower since World War II, right? And before the United States, there was England, right? Was the world power. So I had the ability to go to Geneva, and I toured the first UN capital, which was the League of Nations back when, prior to World War II. So new world powers put in World War II, the UN's place there. So for me, it's interesting how now the US is transitioning out of this time in history where it's competing against a rising power like China, and we're seeing this back and forth game, right? I feel like here in the United States, we've heard this whole trade war talk. We've heard about this back and forth now for a few years. It all started with the trade war. I think it really got ramped up then. But now we have, the U.S. economy doing extremely poorly. We have the dollar now going through its crisis. We have massive, liquidity being supplied by the Fed. And what's looking like now, potentially maybe the end of the petrodollar, who even knows, with negative oil futures. So it's just really interesting to me that this is all happening during this kind of time period that we're seeing a rise of China now. And right or wrong is not the answer. That's the problem I think people have from their subjective view on the world, right? If you were to look at the world objectively and you looked at history objectively, you'd see that there's a pattern and a flow on what happens, right? And if you can put that hat on and then look at it through that lens, you can flood out a lot of this information that's coming and that's made to pull in your subjective understanding. So China is going to become the world power, but now we're just seeing this conflict going on. So for me, that's been a big part of it is, what's the ulterior motive here? I don't know, but we know that we've been talking about China for a long time. A lot of gold, right? A digital
That's kind
yuan.
of just like as they're a competitor. There's always one versus another, right? We had Russia as the Soviet Union that ended in 91, you could say, 92, 93. There was turmoil and shifting over of power and all of that. But, China emerged in the 90s and became a powerhouse in the 2000s and till now. And something I heard on the Joe Rogan podcast, Tim Pool, he's a very known journalist. He was saying whenever a superpower is in charge and another emerging power that could actually be a competitor and actually challenge the superpower, that's when hot wars happen, and that's what China seems to be doing. Now, I think I want to go away from the narrative that we hear on the news and we hear from Washington and maybe from Beijing. To me, I look at it as a world war of classes, right? If we continue to allow ourselves to be manipulated to think that this is a war between superpowers per se, I don't look at it in that aspect. Yes, that's going to happen. There's two nations that are superpowers that will be at odds and might actually have a world war, but I look at it as a class warfare type of situation. You have the top 1% of the world against maybe another 1% trying to vie for power there, right? At the end of the day, us that are the people that are not, right? The blue, white collars that are just you and I, we will be affected the most, right? Because what happens? Okay, China, let's say a hypothetical war between China and the United States. China wins. We will have an implementation of whatever that government wants upon us, right? We look at them as a communist, in my opinion, they're a communist hybrid. They're communists when it comes to a form of government, but they're capitalists and everything else. But if they impose to us a system similar to them, we won't like that. But let me tell you something right now with what the government here in the United States has been actually pushing through with surveillance technology, chipping away at our rights, and it's not saying it figuratively, literally is being chipped away. We have stronger gun rights. We've had rights being chipped away from the First Amendment. We can't say things freely as much as we used to. And we criticize China so much. You hear it on the media. You hear people in your social media channels. You go on Facebook. You go on Instagram, wherever, Twitter, and you hear people, China, they oppress their people. They don't allow their people to have freedom of speech and all of that. Right? This is what everyone says. This is what you hear, especially now with this narrative of COVID. But let me tell you what. Here in the United States, you have the same situation happening and people are not pushing back. They're allowing that same system here. When you hear that we might actually have a coding system, yellow, red, green, to be able to do commerce because of COVID, you don't hear protest, right? When you hear Bill Gates saying that we have to have mass vaccinations, for COVID without actually breaking down safety protocols and the like, without question. And if you question, you get shut down.
Mm-hmm.
That's another issue, very similar to the ones that we criticize. When you can't have freedom of speech, if you and I say certain things that go against the protocols of the WHO, and we have it on YouTube, we have it on Facebook, YouTube, and the like, and all of those companies could come and shut us down, right? Because it doesn't go with their guidelines, their safety guidelines, and whatever they want to call it. That's the same thing that happens in China. In China, you and I can't have a conversation like this because of the same guidelines that they put as a government. The difference is that here in America, we're capitalists. And here in America, corporations own the nation. And everybody knows that. And I don't want to hear, that's crazy talk. Yeah, well, it's crazy talk, right? But every time the elections come around or every time we have a conversation between peers, We always talk about how corrupt the government is, but when real situations like what's going on right now emerge, people don't want to grab their balls and actually do something about it. They just want to just sit there and allow things to happen. What are we going to do about this? I don't know.
Do you think it's the complacency of the West, Mike? Like for me, and we said we had an episode a few episodes ago talking about complacency kills again. It's really people in the West, at least from my belief or what I've observed so far, is that at least in certain classes of people in the United States, right? Because not everyone is in the same class in the U.S., although the gap is the widest it's ever been. But, you know, a lot of Americans have become complacent with their lifestyle over the last, 60, 70, 80 years, right? We've lived in this bubble since World War II. You had that massive boom after World War II. We were still in the gold standard. It was right after the war. So as this transition happens, there's a period of enlightenment, they call it, after the war, where the new world power kind of controls and things kind of start getting built back up, and then life gets back to normal. And through the 80s and 90s, it was that way. And then we had the internet that came out, or, in the late 2000s, started getting early adopted. And, people that grow up here in the United States, in New England, some classes of people haven't lived the same lifestyle as maybe someone in Eastern Europe, or someone in Syria, or someone in Iraq, or even someone in Britain, right? It's all different. But when I went to France 2 years ago, and I saw the Gilets jaunes for myself on Saturdays, and they've still been protesting, I believe, every Saturday, even defying against the coronavirus, they actually knew how the financial system worked. They knew how the economy functioned. They had a pretty good understanding on banks. When I was there was an attempt. This was early on in the Gilets jaunes movement. So, now as time goes on, looking back, it's kind of wild to think about. But they had organized a run on the ATMs on one Saturday that I was there in Lyon. So all of them at one time on a Saturday were going to go withdraw as much money as they could from their ATMs and all around the city. And what that does is you end up actually crippling that bank, or at least that satellite bank, because we talk about fractional reserve banking. They're only required to carry 10%, which, by the way, that was stripped away, I believe, 2 weeks ago, where the banks eliminated the Fed eliminated the reserve requirement on the banks right now. So actually, as a matter of fact, the banks right now have less than 10% in cash at a branch. And I think that's why the FDIC came out with this video on Twitter I saw. I couldn't believe it for my eyes. I will post this for the fans. But they were literally telling the audience, you should keep your money at an FDIC bank. There's no reason to take it out. It's safer there. What are you going to do? Put it on your mattress? They don't want a bank run. But in France, these people knew how the banking system worked. They were upset at Macron. They were upset at the wealth gap, the inequality. He taxed them on a fuel tax at the end of 2017, and it put them over the edge. And we see that happened in France. But if you look back earlier than that, it's also happened in Egypt. It's also happened in Hong Kong. It's also happened in South America. All of these protests that we've been seeing come up around the world over the last 10 years, they've been slowly building up and coming up. But fundamentally, they all exist because of the wealth gap, inequality, taxation, and government control. And central banking, right? That is the biggest thing. And Kaiser Report has done a great job labeling it GIABO, the global insurrection against bank occupation. But, I wonder what it's going to take for people here in the United States to actually get it like the rest of the world. We're very, very confident. Yeah.
Was going to take is a COVID and a return of a COVID and a return of the economy, quote unquote. And once we return to this economy that apparently is supposed to get better, people will see the true colors of what's really happening. They'll see that they won't be able to return to their job as it used to be. They'll see that they won't be able to purchase a home like they wanted to a year ago. They'll start seeing that they won't be able to go and retire. They'll start seeing all of these little things pop up. And that's going to create an alert in people's mind that things are not the same. The problem that we've had in this country for many, many years is that America is a homogenized nanny state. We have nanny, mommy government, putting us in a bubble, protecting us, apparently, from the evils of the world, right? and living in a world that's very different than the rest of everybody else, right? America does not live in the same world as France does, as Albania, Russia, Thailand, China. They don't live in that same world. Even Dubai, that looks like a futuristic, luxurious paradise, they still have realities in their region that we don't even have. And the closest turmoil that we do have is Mexico, and we still are numb to it. Why? Because to us it seems like a faraway country. But let me tell you what, right? Well, this is the situation we've had. We've had hard times that have made strong people. And these strong people have made easy times. And what these easy times throughout the last 60 years has done, 70 years since World War II, it's made weak and soft people. And we have a weak and soft society. And people don't want to realize it because they don't want to be deemed and called they're soft and weak, but that's what we live in. Because let me tell you what, when we look at Bitcoin, for example, here in America, people look at Bitcoin as an investment, as a commodity, as a stock, or whatever you want to call it. No, we go to Venezuela, go to Russia, where there's fluctuations in currency. They use it as a means of survival. They can't trust the ruble. They can't trust the peso. They can't trust whatever currency it is in those markets. They can't trust it. So they put their money within crypto to protect their assets. Here in America, we don't have those fluctuations. Other nations do. When there's a crash in oil, other nations feel it completely off the bat. Right now, we have countries in Latin America, hyperinflation, just hitting them left and right. One day, there's a fluctuation in their currency. When they're going to go get bread and milk, now it costs triple, 4 or 5 times. Here in America, we're starting to see this happen because of COVID. You can't easily go to your supermarket. You can't go to Whole Foods or your ShopRite or wherever and just pick up something simply. No, now you have lines. Now you have shortages. Now you have the situations that other countries have had for so long. We're facing it here. And people have expectations that hopefully things will get back to normal. And let me tell you what, I would wish that was the case. But when you actually break down the numbers of what the economy is showing, what's happening with our health system, what's happening around the world with conflict, the rumors of war, you have China probably propping itself up to fight and invade Taiwan. They're shifting. America's shifting their bombers in Guam and pulling them away, because China apparently has weapons that could obliterate all of our bombers in Guam. There's all these things going on in the background. You got an oil war. You got Russia, Saudi Arabia, America just propping up oil. There's all of this going on. It's heated, right? And now America has faced the hard times. The hard times is what's going to make hard people. The positive of this is that we're going to have to learn how to fucking grind and deal with this. And if we could get through as a society and actually protect ourselves from having our rights taken away and all of this stuff, then we'll come out stronger and have a better society for the future generation. But if we don't, we'll falter. The country as itself could collapse from being a superpower. Another will emerge if it's not done right. And the only way to do things right is to push back on the mainstream media, is to push back on the government, and I mean on both left and right politics. I don't give a damn if you're a Republican or a Democrat. All right, let's look at the freaking numbers. All of the politicians that are there in the Senate and the House and all of that, they have not been working for your rights. They've been working for the corporations' rights. So that needs to be pushed back. Right now, I hear that there's going to be strikes happening this weekend, right? People that work in Target and Amazon, all these workers that have been working diligently throughout COVID, they're trying to stage a strike. Good for them. You know what? To me, that doesn't look like socialism. That just looks like a group of people that are freaking sick of
I like that you brought up
taking advantage of
crypto there too, because I feel like we are finally actually in a point right now where, to your point, Americans are starting to understand the potential of this technology, not from an investment point of view, not from a speculative point of view, but from a point of view of actual sound, hard wealth preservation, right? and it's absolutely true. I've one of the largest things that I've had getting across to people when I've tried to explain Bitcoin or Monero or actual legit digital currencies that are being used right now is that they are an escape from what you have right now in your current financial system, right? Like if you go to Greece, right? Greece, they had their crisis in 2013 and 14. Bitcoin was there to at least save those people's savings from dropping every couple weeks from inflation. Venezuela is the same thing. So let's kind of elaborate a little bit more on the crypto stuff, Mike, because I think that this is kind of something that is going to be talked about more. The Fed just printed $6 trillion. So I think that if people understand, at least, and they're open to understanding math, you can see that, there's a numbers game there, and 6 trillion is quite a bit. So our dollars have been inflated a lot more. But a lot of people don't really understand, what it is. We've been talking about this for a while, though. I mean, we've been talking about gold. We've been talking about Bitcoin. We've been doing this for 2 years now. Some people don't want to understand. A lot of people in the past, I've had people texting me that I haven't heard of in 2 years since the last mark run up in the.
We look at within the problems that are here because it's interconnected to everything else, right? We live in a globalist, society. Everything's connected. You need to know what's going on in Saudi Arabia when they're pumping large amounts of oil and see how that's going to affect here in the United States, right? How it's going to affect the dollar, right? Why would it affect the dollar? Well, we have petrodollars. What are our petrodollars? Well, for you to buy and sell oil, you got to do it with the U.S. dollar. So if we're pumping a lot of oil and the oil crashes in value, then Saudi Arabia won't collect as many dollars. And if they're not collecting as many dollars, that means that they can't actually fund their sovereign funds, which is actually used to purchase a lot of U.S. goods and weapons and all types of debts. Everything's interconnected, and that's just one tiny bit of what the micro economy is. The macro economy. Now, when we're talking about crypto, here in America, we don't see that the fluctuation of the dollar. People don't see that. Right now, I go and buy a car for $30,000. I'm going to get a car that probably is worth $30,000. We already have a mindset. Hey, a car that costs $30,000 should have this, 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 and that. That's how we look at everything here in America. We look at, okay, Netflix is $10 or $12 a month, and that's what it costs. And if there's another streaming service similar to Netflix, it should cost the same. Everything, we already have it as muscle memory in our minds. Now, when you throw in what happened with oil, negative $30, people didn't even grasp to understand how that could be and how that's going to affect us. Are we going to get paid to get gasoline? All these thoughts go into people's minds, right? That only happens when you actually see it happen. People have not seen a crash in the dollar. But if you actually start to study how currency works and you see how the Federal Reserve works and the whole system that is in place, and you notice that, okay, fiat currency, if you print a certain amount, what will happen after the fact? Now, if you look at history, you look at Germany back in the 1920s, when they lost the World War, the first one, and they need to pay reparations, they started to print the Deutschmarks rapid amounts of time, the way the United States is doing right now. And what did that happen? What happened was that, a Deutschmark, with one Deutschmark, you could buy a loaf of bread. 3-4 years later, you needed 100,000 Deutschmarks to buy a loaf of bread. People never seen that here in America. But they've had in every other country, except for here and maybe Canada. Even Europe's seen this situation recently. They've seen this. So we're talking about Greece. You mentioned Greece, Joe. Greece is that was a huge deal. That wasn't that long ago. We talked about it, but to Americans, it seems like a faraway land. That will never happen here. Let me tell you what, it's not as far as you think, because Greece is a European nation, right? Part of the EU. That's as close as you could get. That in Canada is as close as you could get to what could happen here. All right, that is probably the canary in the coal mine for us here in America. Shit, you could go to Puerto Rico, that's a territory in the United States, to see what's going on down there, and you could blame it on the government all you want, and you could blame it on the people of Puerto Rico if you want to. Oh, that's they created that mess. All right, but look at that. Look at the economic system there, and look at everything. You start to pick microly what happened and why Puerto Rico got to where it got. And then you could look at it and be like, oh shit, this is a mirror of America. What happened in Puerto Rico is a mirror of what's happening here. It just happened quicker because it's a smaller landscape. It's the same thing. Now let's go back to crypto. Why crypto's important? Because let me tell you what, if you look at Russia when the ruble collapsed about 7 years ago, the only two ways that people were able to protect their assets was to get rubles while it was high, quote unquote, which was pretty much preventing it from keep going lower. They went and bought cars and televisions, and they bought furniture, and they bought cell phones, and they bought crypto because they knew that their currency was going to collapse. And purchasing technology and shit like that was actually worth more than their freaking currency. This is why crypto is important to us. Because if not, then you're going to have to buy laptops. You're going to have to store laptops in your garage to actually trade. That's pretty much bartering, and that's what other nations do. That's what happens in Venezuela. That's happening here very, very soon. And you can't really even say how to stop it. There's like, well, how you stop this, Mike and Joe? I don't freaking know. All I know is that you could prevent something worse happening by putting a stop to what the fuck the feds do.
And a lot of people can learn that by following us at the Nonconformist /subscribe. No, it's true though. No, it's absolutely true. And a lot of people, we just happen to be living in that era, that time of history where this transition occurs. If you look at it, if we look at the timeline and we take a step back, right, and you just look at history objectively, and this is why I even say the last year of my life has been so fast paced, because I've come to realize that we're entering this transitionary period that only really happens once every 100 years, 80 to 100 years. You get that generation where there's massive change that's happening globally. Industrial revolutions are occurring. That usually follows these changes in powers too, right? We're now going through the next industrial revolution, the tech revolution. It hasn't really happened yet. It's happening now, and we're just seeing the beginning of it. And it's just that we're going through that period, and it's a shock to people. If you've just listened to us, and if you just take a step back and actually look at what's going on, you start to see that yes, that there is a currency, there's a structure that has been around for the last 60 to 80 years that's operated a certain way. But that has only been there for that part of history. Like every 80 to 100 years, the reserve currency changes. Here we are going through a dollar crisis now. And I saw a chart today that officially labeled this month right now worse than the actual Great Recession from 2007 and 8. We have passed those marks right now. We're going through that period, and we've tried to explain to people ways that you can preserve your wealth going through this. Crypto is a big part of it, and once people realize that they've been living in a world of digital money this whole time, like they've been looking at their online banking for the last couple of years, 10 years, you're sending money through Venmo and PayPal. You're texting every day. We look at our screen more than we look at anything else. Once you kind of just objectively look at that situation, you say, yeah, crypto's not a bad idea right now. And it really has preserved some wealth. And that's what we provide to people too. But we don't know the future, and but we have a pretty good idea. My whole point of view lately on what's been going on is that we're entering this next phase. I feel like now we're finally actually stepping into that world of technology, the true technological revolution right now, right? And right now people are going to have to decide one of two things. There's going to be online money, right? We know that this currency system's ending. The dollar's ending. Fiat currencies are inflating away right now. the Fed's got to print more than just $6 trillion, right? Canada, I saw today, just got negative rates. So negative rates are coming to the US. Once you get to negative rates, that means the system's done. So we have to transition off of it anyways. That's why we've seen China come out with their digital yuan. And I actually saw McDonald's and I think one or two other Western companies are actively engaged in that in China. They're testing it right now as we speak. So, we exactly. And we're moving into this world now. And what we've been trying to tell people this whole time is that you need to be prepared. And there's two ways when it comes to currency. If you're going to be dealing with a digital form of money anyways, you could be using your government money, or you could also be saving in the online type of gold like Bitcoin, or you could be just deciding today that, you're going to take your own sovereignty back into your own hands. You're not going to let someone else steal from you. And if we're going to move into this tech world anyways, people got to get over this whole thought of online money, preventing them from even wanting to know about it. It's a big deal. And it's going to become an even more, a large part of your life here in the next couple months as we start to continue to go through what we are with the stimulus plans. So, we're going to see propaganda come out over more internet-based stuff, more internet forms of money, right?
It's true. We have to, people need to start actually educating themselves before the system hijacks the information and controls it and teaches you the incorrect mentality of what currency is, because they'll do that. They did that with 401ks, right? Pensions, we knew, our parents and grandparents knew what a pension was. You worked for a company 20, 30 years. After that, you did your time. You got a nice retirement check. And if it coincided with your Social Security, you got it too, right? Now, they introduced a 401k system, Roth IRAs and all of that, and they educated people that this is a great way for you to control your retirement plan. And your corporation will come and put a percentage in there, and this is how it's going to work. And they sold it to us at a great time economically, so it looked very well. That's how they packaged it to us. And people till this day do not know how IRAs, 401ks work. They don't understand that, hey, you can't go to your Voya account and start shifting stocks in there and mutual funds, and hey, maybe I should get my fund within my 401k and put more on crypto, Bitcoin, or gold, or whatever it is. You can't do that. Somebody's doing the stuff for you. Somebody's in the behind the scenes managing that, and you don't know. You're just blind. Somebody is behind the scenes pulling levers and playing with your hard-earned dollars that you're supposed to think one day this is going to actually help you for your last stage of life. Now, why am I mentioning this? Because the system has created their own story and version to sell it to you so that you feel comfortable and trust it to help you carry you to your dying days. Now, with crypto, they're going to do the same thing. Things will change. Right now, we have a digital currency being created within the Federal Reserve System, right? They're going to come in, they're going to present it to you in a certain way, and then they're going to demonize any other alternative coin out there so that you don't play with anything else. That's what they did with the dollar, right? What they did with the dollar throughout the world was pretty much collapse currency within Colombia, within Peru, within places in the Middle East. They went doing that, right? You don't want to use your own currency. Your own currency is garbage. Use the dollar, right? That's what they did. And now what's going to happen within all of those nations when the dollar collapses? You're going to get anarchy. And you're going to get anarchy in a negative. I don't think anarchy is bad, right? So I'm not going to use it in that term. But for a lot of people out there that don't know what it means and they're going through what the mainstream tells them, anarchy will happen, which is people are going to freaking riot. And that's happening right now in Lebanon. Lebanon, go look on the news what's happening in Lebanon. Hyperinflation. Like that came out of nowhere. 2-3 days ago, people started going to the stores to go buy goods for breakfast and all that, and they started to see that currency ain't worth shit. It ain't worth shit.
It's so dirty.
What does that mean?
It's so dirty.
That,
that paper fiat. It's so dirty.
Yeah, it's dirty. Yeah, it's dirty. It's a freaking. It's a slut, right? It uses you, and then it leaves you with nothing, right? So if you have alternative coin, right now in that situation in Lebanon, that's going to hold you over your family. So, it's something that I myself, I have to figure out. I look at Monero as a great alternative coin because of its security
Yep.
apparatus, right? It's more secretive. I don't need big, corporations like Facebook and all that knowing where I spread my crypto to and then use that to sell it and make more money while they're trying to take away my freedom of speech. Oh, well, you don't need to use Facebook to actually, if you want to say things. But let me tell you what, they're monopolizing all routes of communication, all right? We don't have copper landlines communicate like we used to. It's all fiber optics and it's now all wireless. 5G is coming into play. And who's the one controlling 5G? Is all the tech companies. So all the tech companies are going to pretty much control the narrative of speech. All right? And if you control the narrative of speech, now you don't have a fucking voice. So you better start using it now and you better start pushing back because soon enough, no one's going to listen to you. And if it's already bad enough that the government and all of these people don't listen to you, think about 10 years from now. Think about, the ones you criticize. Oh, China. Everyone's talking shit about China. And I'm not here to defend them, but I'm here to say, hey, that power that you put behind your voice, pointing fingers at China saying that they need to pay. Look how they treat their people. That regime is this and this and that, right? That's what people say. I hear that shit every day now. Why don't you use that same here in this country where you live in, where they're actually mimicking those systems that are put in place and they're trying to implement that here? Use that before it's too late.
That's going to be it. I think that's all for today. And, it's the takeaways are, be aware, understand, and, just, if you enjoy this kind of content, you're someone that's already seeking this stuff. So, we try to provide that to the best of our ability. But that's it. That's it.
What others say. Don't get scared that, don't coward. And I hear this from a lot of my friends. They're like, man, like I try to tell people and it's like they look at me a certain way. I try to tell them this might happen and we got to do this and they're like they brush it off or they ridicule me. Ridicule them back with freaking knowledge. Don't just go with what we're saying or with what others say. Do the research yourself and do real research. I know there's a lot of noise out there and conspiracy theories is a big thing right now and I'm a conspiracy theorist myself, quote unquote, what people would want to call me. I look at it as I'm a person that questions everything, and if that's a conspiracy theory then all right, but you know what, when I look at conspiracies I like to really look at the facts to back it up. And when you look at Operation Mockingbird and the like, that's facts, all right? When you look at articles that have been taken out of the Freedom of Information Act and is actually proven, those are facts. That's not conspiracy theory, all right? Those are facts. When you look at what's going on with COVID and when you look at there's the Harvard head of chair of biology and all that selling biological materials to Chinese spies, that's a fact. That's there, That's not a conspiracy theory. It's a conspiracy theory because it's not in the mainstream media and you freaking never heard of it. But once you start actually doing research and you save all this information, which I actually tell people, and I wish people could do this more, save as much of this information you find. Save it, store it, because it's going to come to a point that none of this is going to exist and we won't even have this in the history books. Book of Eli. Watch it. Look at it.
And we'll make sure that we utilize these new technologies to mint this online on a non-fungible token or something where it can never be censored. It'll always exist.
The blockchain, we'll have it in the system. We'll be there floating around.
Well, we'll get into some more Bitcoin talk, though. No, more so Monero. Actually, you know what? And maybe we do talk about that next. But that's all, Mike. Take care, y'all.